Welcome, dear viewers, to the Haunted Tales, where the past never rests, and the walls whisper their darkest secrets. Tonight, we embark on a journey beyond the veil, where time stands still, and tortured souls roam the halls. These are not just ruins or relics of history. These are the world's most haunted castles, where echoes of suffering, betrayal, and terror refuse to fade. Keep the lights dim, but not off, for these stories may just follow you home. The curse of Chillingham Castle. The mist rolled thick over the Northumberland countryside, swallowing the ancient silhouette of Chillingham Castle in its eerie embrace. The castle's stone walls, worn by centuries of rain and bloodshed, seemed to breathe with the ghosts of its past. It was a place of beauty and brutality, of nobility and nightmares. And tonight, it would once again claim a soul. Emma Langley stood before the iron gates, staring up at the castle she had dreamed of visiting since childhood. As a historian specializing in medieval architecture, Chillingham was a place she had studied extensively. But no textbook could prepare her for the weight of history pressing against her chest as she took her first step onto its haunted grounds. Her colleague, Daniel Price, chuckled beside her. "Getting cold feet already?" he teased. Emma rolled her eyes. "It's colder than I expected," she admitted, shivering despite her thick coat. The evening air carried a dampness that clung to her skin like unseen fingers. They had been granted exclusive after-hours access to document some of the castle's lesser-known artifacts. Their guide, an elderly caretaker named Mr. Henshaw, approached with slow, deliberate steps. His face was a road map of wrinkles, his eyes dark pools of forgotten knowledge. "Welcome to Chillingham," he said, his voice as brittle as autumn leaves. "You'll be staying in the King Edward room. That one's lively." Daniel smirked. "Lively? You mean haunted?" Mr. Henshaw gave a slow nod. "If you hear whispering in the night, don't answer." Emma felt the fine hairs on her arms rise. A castle of echoes. The interior of the castle was a museum of medieval terror. Rusty suits of armor lined the halls like silent sentinels, their helmets concealing hollow darkness where faces once were. Ancient tapestries, frayed with time, depicted hunting scenes, wolves tearing into the throats of deer, men on horseback impaling wild boars with spears. They stopped before the dungeon, a black maw descending into the earth. Mr. Henshaw held up a lantern, its feeble glow casting flickering shadows on the damp walls. "This dungeon has seen more suffering than any battlefield," he murmured. "Men starved in these cells. Others were tortured beyond recognition." Daniel stepped closer, peering through the iron bars. "And that?" He pointed to a pit in the floor. "The oubliette," Mr. Henshaw said. "A hole where prisoners were dropped and forgotten. Some say their bones still lie beneath." Emma swallowed hard. The air here was thick with a scent she could only describe as centuries-old sorrow. As they ascended the grand staircase toward their chambers, the castle's silence became oppressive. Footsteps seemed to echo even when no one moved. The candle flames trembled as though in fear. "You'll find it's never truly quiet here," Mr. Henshaw said cryptically before leaving them for the night. The watcher in the dark Emma's room was grand yet suffocating. The heavy wooden bed, carved with intricate patterns, dominated the space. A fire crackled weakly in the hearth, failing to chase away the deep chill in the stone walls. She sat at the writing desk, reviewing her notes by candlelight. But something was wrong. The shadows in the corner of the room were too thick, too deep. She felt, watched out a whisper, soft as silk yet undeniable. She turned sharply. Nothing. Only the fluttering tapestry beside the fireplace. With a shaky breath, she told herself it was the wind, until the whisper came again. "Help me!" Emma's blood turned to ice. The voice was close, so close it could have been at her ear. She spun toward the mirror above the fireplace, and screamed. A reflection that wasn't hers stared back. A woman, dressed in tattered gray, eyes hollow as the grave. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. The candle extinguished. Darkness swallowed the room. Daniel's warning. Emma didn't remember running, only that she found herself at Daniel's door, pounding frantically. He answered, groggy but alert when he saw her pale face. "I saw someone," she gasped. "In my room." Daniel frowned but didn't mock her. He had seen enough strange things in his years of researching haunted locations to take her seriously. They returned to her chamber, only to find everything as it had been, except for the mirror. A handprint, smeared as if from inside the glass, marred its surface. "Let's sleep with the lights on," Daniel suggested. The bleeding room. They didn't sleep. The night was filled with faint footsteps outside the door, with tapping at the window despite the height of their room. But it wasn't until the early hours that true terror struck. A scream, shrill, agonized, ripped through the halls. Emma and Daniel ran toward the source, their hearts hammering. The noise had come from the old barracks room. They hesitated before pushing open the heavy wooden door. Inside, the walls dripped with fresh blood. Daniel gagged. "It's not possible," he whispered. The room had been empty only hours before. Now, streaks of crimson ran down the walls as if they bled from the stone itself. A whisper curled through the room. "Leave." Emma turned, and saw them, figures in the shadows. Dozens of them. Some in armor, some in rags. All watching. Daniel grabbed her arm. "We need to go." They ran. Through the winding halls, down the staircase, past the dungeon door that now stood ajar, though no one had opened it. Outside, the cold air hit them like a slap. Mr. Henshaw stood by the gates, a knowing expression on his face. "You saw them, didn't you?" he asked. Emma, breathless, could only nod. The old caretaker sighed. "You're lucky they let you go." Daniel stared back at the castle. "What the hell happened in that room?" Mr. Henshaw's eyes darkened. "That was where the soldiers tortured their victims. Sometimes the past refuses to stay buried." A warning from the past. The next morning, Emma and Daniel left Chillingham Castle, vowing never to return. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them. A week later, back in her apartment, she woke in the dead of night to a whisper. "Help me!" She turned to the mirror, and saw the woman in gray, waiting. Whispers of Bran Castle. The wind howled through the Carpathian Mountains as Mark and Olivia stood at the entrance of Bran Castle. The tour group had dispersed, leaving them alone in the dimly lit corridors of the ancient fortress. Mark adjusted his camera, eager to capture the eerie beauty of the castle, while Olivia rubbed her arms, trying to shake off the unsettling chill that clung to the air. "This place gives me the creeps," Olivia whispered. "That's the point, isn't it?" Mark grinned, snapping a photo of the winding staircase. "The inspiration for Dracula's castle. Imagine all the history hidden in these walls." Olivia frowned. "Or the spirits." They moved deeper into the castle, past tattered tapestries and centuries-old paintings whose eyes seemed to follow them. The stone walls absorbed the sound of their footsteps, making it feel as if the castle itself was breathing. Mark had been enthralled by vampire folklore for years, but Olivia was less enthusiastic. She had read stories of people disappearing in these corridors, of shadows creeping along the walls, and of whispers carried by the wind. "Hey, let's check out the torture chamber," Mark suggested, pointing toward a descending staircase. Olivia hesitated. Something about that part of the castle felt wrong. But Mark was already halfway down, his camera light casting jagged shadows on the stone walls. The chamber was a grim reminder of the castle's dark history. Rusted iron cages, spiked chairs, and racks lined the walls. A large wooden wheel, stained from centuries of use, sat in the corner like a forgotten relic of suffering. Olivia's stomach turned. Mark took a few photos before his camera flickered and shut off. He smacked the side of it. "Damn battery." That was when they heard it. A whisper. Low. Indistinct. Ancient. Olivia grabbed Mark's arm. "Did you hear that?" Mark glanced around. "Probably just the wind." Another whisper. This time, it was unmistakable. A woman's voice, soft and mournful. Olivia's heart pounded as she turned toward the darkest corner of the chamber. There, standing just beyond the reach of their light, was a figure, dressed in a flowing white gown, her face obscured by a tangle of dark hair. She stood perfectly still. Then, slowly, she lifted her head. Her eyes were black voids. Olivia screamed. Mark turned just in time to see the figure dissolve into shadow. The air grew thick, suffocating, as if something unseen had wrapped around their throats. The walls seemed to close in, the flickering candlelight casting grotesque figures across the chamber. "Go! Now!" Olivia yanked Mark's arm. They ran up the stairs, their breath ragged. The corridors twisted and stretched, leading them deeper into the castle instead of out. The paintings they had passed earlier now depicted decayed faces, their eyes hollow and sunken. The whispers followed them. A low, guttural laugh echoed through the halls. The sound of something wet slithering across the stone made Olivia's skin crawl. They turned a corner and stopped, dead in their tracks. A massive wooden door loomed before them, its iron handle shaped like a snarling wolf. It was their only way forward. Mark reached for the handle. Cold, bony fingers wrapped around his wrist. He gasped, spinning around. Olivia's eyes widened in horror. Behind Mark stood the woman from the chamber, her gown now soaked in black ichor. Her mouth stretched into an inhuman grin, revealing jagged, yellow teeth. "Leave!" she hissed, her voice a thousand whispers layered together. Mark and Olivia didn't need to be told twice. Mark wrenched the door open, and they stumbled through, slamming it shut behind them. They were outside. The moon hung low over Bran Castle, its pale light bathing the fortress in an eerie glow. The whispers had stopped. The air was still. Mark and Olivia turned to look at the castle one last time. In the highest tower, barely visible against the night sky, the woman stood. Watching, waiting. Mark exhaled shakily. "We're never coming back here." Olivia didn't respond. She already knew. Bran Castle had let them go, for now. The curse of Leap Castle. The wind howled through the rolling green hills of County Offaly, carrying whispers of the past across the ancient stones of Leap Castle. Nestled atop a craggy hill, the fortress loomed against the gray sky, its silhouette jagged and broken. For centuries, the castle had been a site of unspeakable horror, betrayal, murder, and restless spirits. Those who dared to enter often spoke of shadowy figures, ghostly wails, and the suffocating feeling of unseen eyes watching them from the dark corners of its halls. Caitlin O'Rourke, a historian with a fascination for Ireland's haunted past, had come to Leap Castle alone, determined to uncover its secrets. As she stepped through the massive wooden doors, a cold breath of air swept over her, carrying the scent of damp stone and decay. The entrance hall was dimly lit by the slivers of gray light filtering through the stained glass windows, casting eerie shadows across the floor. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Her research had uncovered the castle's grim history, the bloody O'Carroll clan, who ruled the castle with violence and treachery. The most infamous tale was that of the Bloody Chapel, where one brother had slaughtered another in cold blood as he delivered Massachusetts. It was said that the victim's spirit still lingered, forever bound to the place of his untimely death. Caitlin climbed the stone staircase, her footsteps echoing through the silent corridors. The deeper she ventured, the heavier the air became, thick with an unnatural stillness. Then, as she reached the threshold of the chapel, a sharp whisper cut through the silence. "Leave now!" Caitlin froze. The voice was unmistakable, though no one else was there. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she forced herself to step inside. The room was cold, unnaturally so. Dust motes floated in the dim light, but there was something else, too. A presence. As she examined the crumbling altar, she saw it, a dark stain on the stone floor where the blood of the murdered priest had pooled centuries ago. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted further, her breath becoming visible in the icy air. Then, the whispering returned. Dozens of voices murmured around her, rising and falling, their words indistinct but urgent. The walls seemed to close in, and she felt a suffocating dread coil around her. And then, she saw him. A shadowy figure stood by the altar, his form flickering like a dying candle flame. His face was obscured, but his posture radiated sorrow and rage. Caitlin's body locked up in fear, but she could not look away. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind that had begun to rage inside the room. The figure did not speak. Instead, he raised an arm and pointed toward the far corner of the room, toward a small, rusted grate embedded in the floor. Caitlin swallowed hard, recognizing what it was. The oubliette. A wave of nausea hit her as she recalled the horrors of that pit. It had been a secret prison, a place where prisoners were thrown to rot and die. When the pit had been excavated years ago, workers had found hundreds of skeletal remains. Some had been impaled on wooden spikes at the bottom, ensuring a slow and agonizing death. Caitlin's stomach turned, but she took a step toward it. As she did, the whispers grew louder, overlapping, forming words. "Find them." Her hands trembled as she knelt beside the grate, brushing away centuries of dust. She hesitated, then pried it open with great effort. A foul stench wafted upward, and bile rose in her throat. With the light from her phone, she peered down into the abyss, and her blood ran cold. Bones. More than that, bones with fresh flesh clinging to them. A chilling gust of air rushed from the pit, and the chapel filled with a blood-curdling scream. Caitlin stumbled back, gasping, as the shadowy figure convulsed, its form distorting violently before it let out a final, ear-piercing wail and vanished. The room fell into silence. Shaking, Caitlin scrambled to her feet and ran, her only thought being escape. The moment she crossed the threshold of the chapel, the castle itself seemed to exhale, releasing her from its grip. She never looked back. Later, the police confirmed what she had seen: fresh human remains in the oubliette. A missing hiker, presumed dead for months, had met a fate eerily similar to those centuries-old victims. But who, or what, had placed him there, Caitlin would never return to Leap Castle to find out. But some doors, once opened, never truly close, and some ghosts never rest. The world is full of haunted places, but castles bear the weight of centuries, centuries of war, love, betrayal, and suffering. Perhaps that is why their ghosts refuse to leave. Perhaps, in the silence of night, they are still reliving their darkest moments, trapped between this world and the next. Thank you for joining us on this chilling journey through the most haunted castles in the world. If you dare to step inside any of these places, tread carefully, because history is never truly dead. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon if you're brave enough to return to the haunted tales. Until next time, sleep well, if you can.